So I have HP Lovecraft's chart, and I will
Seen this
send it
before.
to you. And he was not a Cancer. He has the sun in Leo, the moon conjunct Uranus in Libra rising, Cancer MC.
I don't know if he has a birth time, does he?
And Jupiter in Aquarius, which is really interesting. What's his birth time? So he has a Rodden rating of A, and his birth time is 9 a.m. The source of it is David Fisher quotes a colleague from Lovecraft by letter. His biographer, S.T. Joshi, who I've met, in The Life of a Gentleman of Providence, writes, Howard Phillips Lovecraft was built at 9 a.m. on August 20th, 1890 at his home, blah, 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 in Providence, Rhode Island. So if Joshi says it, I believe it.
See, I get a moon in Libra. Wait.
Did I say something other than Libra?
Because Leo. The sun in
moon
Leo.
in Libra. Yeah. The sun's in Leo. Mm-hmm. The moon is conjunct Uranus in Libra. Venus is conjunct the AC, which is very interesting in Libra. So he's got a dignified sun, a dignified Venus, dignified Mercury, which surprises absolutely no one, but that's in the 12th house in Placidus Whirlpool signs. That is really interesting.
Yeah, I remember.
I feel like
I'm like disappointed in his chart. I remember like last time I looked at it, I was like disappointed in it because it was like, I feel like, I don't know, I was like expecting something more, like a Scorpio moon or something, and like some like really messed up placement that like spoke to the paranoia. And you can find it, I think, here, but I don't know.
I think it's the Pluto and Neptune and Gemini. Like that is a conjunction, and he's got this obsession with sea creatures, which is freaking literal for Neptune. So like nightmares from the sea, writing about nightmares from the sea, and he's got the South Node in Sagittarius. So not only does he have the nightmares from the sea, but he also has for him, that's the color out of space, because like Gemini is what he's like going towards in terms of like his development as a person, but like his default, his past, his conditioning is very Sagittarius. So like you can see with like the racism problem,
his Mars and Sagittarius
that like
too.
Fundamentalist, that Mars and Sagittarius, hyper fundamentalist, like nasty ideologies, because he's got that fear of the Pluto, Neptune, and Gemini opposite. So it's like, and yet he's drawn to it. So you can kind of see that like tension in his work. Like, you know, he was a nasty racist, and as an Italian American, he's
almost like a normal racist.
I have to look at that,
unfortunately, but
yeah. I mean, like he was definitely like a product of his time, but like, you know, you can see, we were saying a minute ago before I pressed record that it's like he's a case study in the way that racism breaks the way people's brains work, which is why I find him so fascinating.
Yeah.
Aside from the fact that he's a freaking amazing storyteller.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I can't help but just be like a little skeptical about the birth time, but I'm always questioning it. That is like sort of dangerous territory though too. It's like when you start wanting the birth chart to fit what you think it should be. It's like you're getting into like, well, you know, it's like you're refusing to see the chart because like, well, the time must be wrong because, you know, it doesn't fit my way of seeing astrology. But it is an A rating. Is it because
you want him to have a Scorpio moon?
A little bit. It would make a little more sense, but I also would think like, I don't know, it's like he's so dignified, but, and this actually goes to some of my, not even hot takes anymore. They started as hot takes and now they're like my solidified real takes to a large degree, is that dignified planets, they have such high expectations of things that sometimes it's like you can get stuck on your super dignified planets because you like refuse to do something a different way. And that was totally HP Lovecraft. Like he He refused to get a job, would not get a job. Yeah. He was only going to be a writer. Even when he didn't make very much money writing, he continued to do it. Which fits, because he has tons of, well, three out of 7 traditional planets, which is a lot of dignified stuff.
Yeah. And that Mercury in Virgo, of course, is double dignified. So it's like,
God, and
that's worth an extra one. And it doesn't.
No, nothing. I was just thinking about like the words that HP Lovecraft would use. They're so like, almost like, and I don't even know if he actually invented these words, but they become so associated with him because he's the only one that used them. But what's like Eldritch horror or something there's a handful of other really good ones. God.
Yeah, you can't use that word anymore without people thinking Lovecraft if they know Lovecraft at all.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just looking at his chart. I don't know if you're...
I feel like that's such a Virgo word.
Eldritch.
Like, it's so...
Precise. It means something very specific.
Yeah.
Yeah, Go ahead.
I kind of love it. It's a little juvenile, but I love that Leo sun because he had that thing where he was like low-key obsessed with cats. And I'm like, it's just yet one more thing in his chart that's like so freaking literal.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I always think of Saturn and cats, because Saturn is like the Picatrix is like rules cats, but I always forget about how cat-like, or actually think lions, but there is a feline quality to Leo.
I mean, lions are cats, so
there is an entitlement that cats have that is not Saturnian.
Yeah. I feel like that Venus in Libra on the AC is really, really interestingly indicative too. Like, especially since he has this quality of really wanting to cling to the Victorian period. And I feel like, maybe in a past life, he would have been like one of those stereotypical, though historically false, Victorian women who was always like on the fainting couch,
Yeah. See, maybe this is why like the cultural context matters a lot. Or just like the time period, the context of like the time. Venus in Libra is maybe not a hot take. I don't know. This is based on research. Venus in Libra, they like to fuck, right? I don't know if you've known a lot of them, but they're very comfortable with sex. They like it a lot, right? And I don't know. He was such a prude, right? Like he was such a like. Like Venus and Libra on the ascendant is not. It's not a very prude Venus. I wish I'd a more tactful way of explaining that, of saying that about Venus and Libra. It's a great quality, but it's that surprises me, and I'm trying to find an explanation.
Do you think maybe he doth protest too much?
Maybe he was a freak, like behind.
Or maybe it's that. Maybe it's that Uranus there, like. Venus would typically express itself in one way, and yet Uranus tends to be like where we rebel. And so maybe he felt all of this pressure to behave in that stereotypical Libra way, and having the Uranus there almost like inverts it.
Yeah. Well, and that's also maybe what's making me think about Libra, especially of all the signs. How tuned in it is to Libra's so tuned in to like what is acceptable at the time, or like what is convention, and what is appropriate, what's popular, what's in, what's hip. And during his time period, like that more Victorian, maybe sensibility about things was a little more how Venus and Libra manifested at the time. I don't know. Because it's even like it's sextile Mars,
Yeah,
it's trine Jupiter. Sure. Like I feel like that shouldn't be a super inhibited Venus. But that is Venus has Venus and Libra has like class though too. So I didn't want to be like Venus and Libra's a hoe. Like that's not what I was implying. But it is very it's tasteful and maybe good taste.
It reminds me of like
being modest or being prudish. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. When I think of Venus and Libra, I think of Inara from Firefly.
Oh wait, who's it? I loved that movie.
She was the companion.
It's so long now.
She was the companion who was basically like a high class sex worker. So like it was part of her character that she had a lot of sex, and also she was incredibly classy and empathic.
Now I remember.
And refined, and she was the most civilized person on the spaceship. Like to me, that's Venus and Libra.
That's absolutely Venus and Libra. It's super classy and super like there's no shame, you know, like very comfortable with everything. Like that is comfortable. I don't know, or everything that is like within generally accepted parameters. Like that makes sense.
I feel like if HP Lovecraft could hear us talking about comparing him to Inara, he would have a seizure.
I don't know though, because how was his marriage? I feel like he was his wife was very devoted to him, and she took care of him and stuff, right? It's been a while since I've like read his biography.
She did take care of him. He was taken care of by women in his life quite a lot. But they were not really together for very long, or at least not practically speaking. They definitely at least separated pretty quickly after they got married.
I don't know. That'll be a mystery to me. We're speculating.
I don't know.
So usually like I have like a good segue into like the thing that is popping into my mind, but I feel like I don't have a segue. Like I almost just have a totally different topic unless you have more to say on this. But
my Mercury in Aries is what's a segue?
Yeah.
What is this word? I don't know what it means.
Mercury in Taurus,
so like just dive in, dude.
Like gently segue into it, like have a tie-in. I don't know. Well, yeah. I wanted to talk a bit about because I was having thoughts about Gemini and Cancer and their relationship with each other earlier.
Yeah, so you were saying that you think that they have a connection with Antisha, and like obviously I can't argue with you about whether or not they have a relationship with Antisha. Like Antisha it's a system. Yeah. I don't get to decide what the system is, but I've always felt like there's a really, really sharp break between Gemini and Cancer, and you're kind of like, so I want to.
Well, it seems like that, right? But they like, and this is like maybe the way I think about the Antisha. Contra Antisha, I'm on the fence of whether they're just basically another kind of Antisha, or if they're like the sort of go-to interpretation that astrologers who use Antisha use for them is that the Antisha, which is basically anything that is equally distant from Cancer or Capricorn, the cusp, the cardinal cusp. It's basically that they're like a secret conjunction. They're in a secret conjunction. So if you have a planet at, we'll say Cancer, at 15 degrees Cancer, we'll say 20 degrees of Cancer, it has Antisha with Gemini at 10 degrees of Gemini. So those planets would, while we would say using Hellenistic or traditional aspect doctrine that they're in aversion to each other, Antisha suggests that they have a relationship, that they can sort of see each other because they have an affinity. And affinity is really the essence of, I think, interpreting aspects. I think that the idea of an aspect is like, okay, they have this relationship because they see each other, they're encountering each other. The signs have a basis for a relationship because they have this in common or this in common. But like Gemini and Cancer, Cancer has water. It's cardinal versus Gemini, which is mutable air. Like, what do they have in common? Other than this equal ascension time, I think it is, or they represent points of the year that have the exact same amount of sunlight. Anyway, so Gemini, right? It's Gemini likes to chat. Am I right? Very chatty. Kind of all over the place sometimes. Sort of follows, whatever is the most interesting to it at any given moment. Cancer has a similar quality of being very chatty. They're just you have to know the Cancer before they'll chat your ear off. Gemini will always chat your ear off. Cancer will chat your ear off, but when you have fed them maybe, or you've made them comfortable, they feel safe around you, so they're like, oh, okay, I can talk to you, and then round and round you go. And it has like a sort of, the moon is steadier for sure, like than Mercury. Like it's always kind of going more or less the same pace, but it has a similar quality to Mercury in that it's fast moving, and it changes. It changes a lot. It's going through changes in regular cycles. Mercury's more unpredictable. But just I don't know, Gemini and Cancer, I don't know. There's something under the surface about the way that they have something in common. I don't know. There's a discomfort, I think, there. There's like some of the dissonance that you normally would have between signs in aversion to each other. But like in contrast to like Aries and Taurus, I think Gemini and Cancer have a lot more in common than Aries and Taurus.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, I mean, Aries and Taurus share like bluntness in common. Like, there's a directness with Aries, and Taurus kind of, it's not that Taurus lacks sensitivity because it's ruled by Venus, but there's this honest and direct quality to Taurus. And like Aries, I'm saying this as a Mercury Aries, of course, kind of has no sense of proportion sometimes, no sense of sensitivity, whereas with Taurus, it seems to me it's more like it doesn't understand the point of beating around the bush. Like, there's this story that Stephen Forrest tells that I absolutely love. He was talking to a Taurus friend of his about thinking about getting married, and he was beating himself up because really the reason that he wanted to get married was because he was tired of dating. And this Taurus friend was like, being tired of dating is maybe a really good reason to get married. If you don't want to be dating anymore, maybe you should stop dating. There's this quality of like stating the obvious, but which is somehow also revolutionary. That
that's why I don't smoke weed as much anymore, because I have Mercury in Taurus, but I would fall into that so much because like, whoa, like this really simple, obvious thing, there's so much meaning to it. There's so much depth maybe in this really simple statement. And that's what maybe I think Taurus is generally good at. Is like, I always like the word laconic, which is it's like derived from like the Spartans, the Lacedaemonians. And they would just say things in a way that was very straightforward and to the point, but kind of pithy, like sort of catchy, like sort of like there's a pleasantness maybe to Taurus that Aries doesn't have. Not that Aries is entirely unpleasant, though Aries has a performance kind of quality too. It can be a little bit of a showman, a little bit of a Let me prove to you that I can Mercury. I don't know if we're talking about Mercury.
I'm not just going to jump out of this airplane. I'm going to jump out of this airplane with style.
Oh yeah. But Mercury in Taurus has it's more of a low key style, I guess. I don't know. It has a sense of style. Taurus totally does. But it's very low key, and it's like they don't want you to know how much they actually think about the way they dress.
Mm-hmm.
Like a very controlled sort of normal with a flair. I don't know. Like you don't see Tauruses dressing in super like ostentatious kind of bright colors, but it's usually like well put together.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really struggle with as a Taurus Leo person. Like, my Leo wants to be flashy and wear lots of makeup and wear sparkly things. And whenever I try to do something like that, I look in the mirror and it just looks garish every single time. And it's like, I have to have this like simple down to earth quality about my style, because otherwise I look like I'm trying to be somebody else.
See, when it comes to like Venus and dignity, right? Or just like the signs that it takes care of or has deep associations with. Libra, it might get a little more colorful than Taurus.
Oh yeah.
But it sort of depends. Like, it's not going to get garish ever. It's the exaltation of Saturn. Actually, a lot of Libras, like, they'll usually understated clothes and understated like colors, but they might have like a sharp, bright color, but like maybe mixed in with like, it's like they have things that will ground it, you know? Like Venus, it typically doesn't get super garish. I don't know. It fits. Like Pisces, Venus and Pisces is about the most of that you'll get, I think. But it's still there's still coordination usually with the colors. Like if it's gonna go loud with the colors, it's gonna use a color wheel or something. Like I don't know.
Yeah, I think of batik when I think about Venus and Pisces. Like lots of colors, lots of flowing, definitely like liquid involved, but like also controlled isn't the word that I want to use, but like coordinated.
Oh yeah. Well, I gotta look up Lady Gaga's chart now. She doesn't have Venus and Pisces, does she?
Nope, she has Venus and Aries.
All right, so I think of Lady Gaga sometimes when I think of Venus and Pisces, specifically for the sort of the glam quality that it can have at times. It is a little more, I don't know, it depends like what it's being aspected. If it's a morning star, maybe Venus and Pisces, maybe a little more of that. Having listened to your talk at the symposium, Rebecoming the One, about Mesopotamian astrology, I do want to pick your brain a little bit on Mesopotamian astrology. Speaking of Venus, which you talked about, the morning star and evening star phase. And I really appreciated that angle on it, because I guess I probably lean on the Hellenistic morning star, evening star. And that like morning star Venus is like sometimes a little more bright and bubbly, a little more sparkly, and a little more attention seeking, like a little more in your face with what it with bringing the Venus, But thinking about it the way you described it is like was in Mesopotamian astrology, is like the warrior side of Venus, which is very interesting. Like,
so for people who didn't catch my talk, and what's wrong with you if you didn't catch my talk? So I talked about how in Mesopotamian astrology, the genders of Venus and the moon are not what we would expect them to be. The moon was a god in Mesopotamia, and sometimes Venus was a god. And originally the god that Venus evolved from was actually a male deity all the time. So there's this interesting quality with Venus where morning star Venus was seen as being male and evening star Venus was seen as being female. And the reason for that or at least a story that is told about it, is the story of the descent of Inanna. And at night, Inanna is the beautiful evening star that is shining in the sky. And, Inanna decides that she's going to go down to the underworld to attend a funeral. Mm-hmm. And she goes down to the underworld, is stripped of all of her symbols of power, gets down there. Her sister really doesn't want to see her. Her sister is the queen of the underworld. Turns her into a piece of meat. The gods have to come together to send these ambassadors down to the underworld to save Inanna's ass. And then she's allowed to come back up on the condition that she sends somebody back in her place. And she comes back up to the ordinary world and finds that her husband has been partying and sitting on her throne instead of mourning her death like everyone else. And so she gets super angry, sends him to the underworld, and is returned to us as angry, warlike Venus Morningstar. So that's the story, where the idea of Venus as being warlike in the morning and more peaceful and diplomatic in the evening comes from.
Well, I find that really interesting, actually. Oh, surprisingly, though maybe being in Aries compensates for this a little bit, but it's like Lady Gaga is an evening star Venus in Aries, which actually kind of fits. And she actually does have she has Jupiter in Pisces and Mercury in Pisces, but the moon in Scorpio is exactly trine Jupiter in Pisces, which totally explains the fashion sense. The peacock sort of style, but it's like a little more refined, but very weird.
Especially with that Pluto moon conjunction. I mean, I feel like that explains the meat dress right there.
I forgot about the meat dress. Yeah.
It's excessive and deadly and dark. And
yeah. I don't know about her. Is this birth time even right? It's not giving me a rating. Anyway, speaking of
the rating is D, double D.
D, yeah.
So
I think I've seen her as a Scorpio rising too.
Apparently her promotional team gave her birth time as 9:53 on Twitter. And then Lady Gaga later tweeted that it's 1:14 a.m. And then on Instagram, she said that it's 5:07 p.m. And then we have a French site with no sources that claims it's 22:50.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's almost like in keeping with Lady Gaga's, like just let it be sort of ambiguous and controversial.
Yep, exactly. But I can kind of see her as a Gemini, though, like a Gemini rising.
Oh wait, no, that would be Mercury in the 10th.
Yeah. And Mercury in detriment, like she definitely has the glam quality. She definitely has like the style, but there's this sense that it's like difficult for her to communicate that style in certain ways. It's like, it feels like that glam is something that she has to work at. And I think that that's a combination of Mercury being retrograde and in detriment in Pisces and Venus in Aries with the sun there.
Yeah, that actually, I mean, that ends up fitting a lot. And actually, a lot of Virgo risings with Mercury in Pisces. It's very common with musicians, performers. Ruler of the 7th, ruler of the 1st in the 7th, which would put the planet in detriment by dignity terms. It's so common in performers and actors, which Tristan and I've talked about this before on Astrology Hotline, but it sort of makes sense, and like that it's like being who others want you to be to some degree, or finding your identity in how others perceive you, like really emphasizing that, like needing that. But that actually
that makes
Gemini rising though, that is interesting because it's, and I don't know if you have ever like done this maybe with thinking about rising signs and like where the planet that rules the ascendant falls, like where the fall is, where the exaltation is, and how that might tell you a lot about like the nature of that sign. Gemini is one of the ones that has confounded me a little bit in terms of. But now it sort of makes sense in that. Well, it's like Gemini having its exaltation in the 4th house, which maybe suggests that it has a bit more in common with Cancer than we might think. Not that the 4th house and Cancer are the same thing, but that maybe Gemini, I mean, is a little more. Well, actually, it almost makes sense. It's like the worst of Gemini is the not shutting up. Like being in the 10th house, like, look at me. While I don't know. No offense, Geminis or Mercury and Pisces. I actually really like Mercury and Pisces a lot of the time. It's not an easy placement to have, but usually super poetic. Usually are very good at conveying very deep and abstract ideas. It's just often feel very misunderstood.
I mean, Demetra George has Mercury in Pisces. Maya Angelou has Mercury in Pisces. Like, I've written a lot about Mercury in Pisces and what it.
Virgo rising.
I've written. Amazing. But I've written about that a lot on my blog because I feel like that's one of those areas where, like, yeah, you can definitely see where people have trouble and you can see them like struggling to communicate themselves. But at the same time, like, I mean, even Plato threw poets out of his republic. And if there is ever a placement where you're going to find a poet, it's going to be Mercury and Pisces. And it's like, this is definitely an area where you can kind of see going back to the Mesopotamians being like, this is dangerous for order and for the state. So we're going to say that this is bad.
Well, and you think that poetry is I don't know, and this actually maybe would have been more the way the Greeks would think too, is because you get the different like pathos, ethos, and I'm not as like I'm not super familiar with like the whole theory. You're a writer, so you might, but I'm just thinking about how ethos are like the emotive form of influence, like using emotion to influence people, to convince them. Emotional arguments are kind of dangerous. Like they're kind of they're scary because they can work really well, but you can convince people to do really irrational shit based on you know, working with the more emotional layer, which, you know, Pisces deals with. Maybe, I don't know, emotion's such a broad word. It's like, what are we talking about when we're talking about emotions? I bet you there's languages that have like better words for the different layers of the different distinctions.
Oh, that would be amazing.
I'm sure. I don't know. Well, like Eskimos. God, that's not appropriate. That's sorry. I grew up in the 90s. Inuits. Yeah.
We both did.
Inuits have
theoretically have 50 words.
For the color white. Which
really
is actually really cool because like there are different, and probably more for them because they are dealing with so many different variations of white. They need the nuance to describe that. But like it makes you wonder to some degree if you have the different words for 50 different words for white in your vocabulary, if you will just see white differently, if you'll see those colors because you have labels for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, in Russian, they have a word for light blue and a word for dark blue in the same way that we have red and pink. Like, you can kind of see how that would, you know, the way that you divide up reality would change the way that things appear in your brain, the way things are categorized. Well, that
actually, I was like, where are we going with this? And then we were just talking about Mercury and Pisces. And it's like, okay, maybe I think we're actually calling on that archetype because that is something that Mercury and Pisces is really good at, is coming up with words for stuff that like nobody, I don't know, that maybe there isn't words for yet. But this is actually a thing that maybe would be scary and challenging to Greek society or any society, any power system, is that once you start defining things, it's like you give those things power, and language is power. Like it's how you really we think based on the language that we have to a large degree. Like our was it in I'm gonna butcher the study, but in Finland, like they have a bunch of different words around time, or they have just a very different way of communicating time. And it just ends up changing their relationship with time. Like, it'd be something that would be very hard for English speakers to like wrap their heads around. It's been a long time since I studied this, but go ahead.
There are languages that don't have words for relative direction. So there's no word for left, right, front, back. The only way that you can talk about directions is north, south, east, and west. And so you put those people in a maze-like building, you send them turning all around and put them in a room where they can't see the sun, and they will still know exactly where north, south, east, and west are.
Yeah.
And it's just because it's impossible for them to communicate relative position in space without knowing where the sun is.
I think I've heard this before too. Yeah.
I love that shit.
Well, I regret like not learning more foreign languages when I was younger, because I feel like it opens up your mind to like so many different ways of constructing thought. Because I'm like always frustrated with like the like I'll like use a word to describe something, if I'm writing, and I'll be like, not satisfied with this word, and so I'll like look up synonyms for it, and I'm like, nah. I don't know.
Yeah,
find like the right word to convey the thought. You're a writer.
That really, really hit home for me when I was, I studied German, and I think I've said this before. I studied German in high school, and then studied it again in graduate school, because that's what I was writing my thesis on, translating German poetry, which is, totally Mercury and Pisces, which I don't have. But it really hit home for me just how important knowing a language, even, I would never say that I was exactly fluent, even though I studied it for 5 years, but I knew it enough that when I was in an existentialism class in college and we were studying Heidegger, who was another racist. This is a racist episode.
Racist everywhere in history.
All of my classmates were struggling understanding Heidegger, and I was like, wait. Okay. So is this word that is translated this way in English, is it Dasein? And like I had this conversation about Dasein and Dasein with my professor, and we talked about the nuances of the differences between those two words, even though they looked identical. It bored everybody else in the class the fuck to tears. But it put me in a position of being able to understand Heidegger in a way that nobody else in the room was able to do, because I understood the basics of German language. And after that, I was like, it was such a mind-shattering experience for me, because it made me realize just how much the brain is programmed by language, and just how much the way that you can see reality and the way that you can talk about reality. I mean, the family of languages that was once known as Indo-European, and I don't know what languages call it now, is particularly suited for talking about the question of existence in a way that other languages are not, which is why we get the whole stream of philosophy descending from Plato, because this language family is able to talk about the question of existence in a way that is completely invisible to other language families. And it's like, we take that so for granted. Like, philosophy is philosophy descended from the Greeks, isn't it?
In the Western world.
And yet the entire in the Western world it is, obviously. But that whole branch of thinking is only possible because of the way that we talk about to be verbs. It's just blows my mind.
Well, and God, and I wish I could recall like the specifics of it. I was like listening to this great courses on mythology. It's like free if you have subscribed to Audible. This would be a great Audible ad.
We should, because
I will just do that naturally, because Audible's great. But it was like if you subscribe to Audible, you get a bunch of great courses and shit. And the one I listened to on mythology, it's like 60 hours long, and it goes through like mythology from like different, like all over the world, like African mythology and Chinese mythology. And it's so interesting because you like see like the overlaps of it. How like you get the same themes coming up in different cultures, but you get like it's almost like only through mythology that you can like taste maybe the way that they think about stuff in ways that you can't. I don't know, like the way that you're hamstrung maybe by being an English speaker or even a Western language speaker. Like you don't have access to maybe that way of thinking, that way of philosophizing, that way of like looking at the world.
Yeah, I feel like I see that a lot. Like, you know, in the myth of Inanna, she goes to the underworld and her sister gets mad at her, and all of a sudden she's a piece of meat. And like, to me, that's so dreamlike. And it's like, what happened? Like, where, how did we make that leap exactly? Like, there must be some kind of like internal rationale for this thing. And yet, all of a sudden there's this big leap. And then, you know, recently I have a collection of Chinese mythology, and I I opened it up and read one of the short stories, and it's a story about this trader who comes in with a bunch of donkeys, and he tells the owner of the tavern, absolutely do not give them water, and then he leaves them out there. And then he comes back and he's got some more donkeys, and it's a hot day, and the tavern owner is like, I know he said not to give them any water, but they're going to die out there. And so he finally goes and gets a bucket and gives them all water. And all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, the donkeys turn into children. And you find out that somehow he has been like engaging in human trafficking by turning humans into donkeys. And then he is taken to the magistrate and gets his head cut off, and that's the end of the story. And I feel like I can see there, like, again, there is got to be some kind of like underlying logic or some things that don't need to be said because that's the way that the world is. That's the water that everyone is swimming in that they don't know that they're swimming in. And yet it's like I can't access that except in my dreams. And then I wake up and I'm like, well, that was a weird dream. I don't know what that was
about. And I almost feel like I'm getting on a thread now where it's leading back to astrology. But it not that it has to necessarily, but like I was really into
No, we're talking about Mercury and Pisces.
And language and which I mean astrology,
the way language changes the brain.
And you're thinking about like the cultural symbols, like, you know, donkeys might mean something slightly different, you know, to like or just like what a symbol evokes might be slightly different from culture to culture. And maybe the thing that will sort of make my head spin a little bit getting into, say, like Mesopotamian astrology is that while you do get like overlaps, it's like, I don't know, like is astrology, which is a conversation I'm not prepared to have yet today. Some days I'm like, I'm all about having the conversation of like, why does astrology work? But it's such a big one. I don't know. It's a hard, my brain's not in that space, but it does get you thinking about like, are these sort of like symbols that are objective in some way, like that generally means something for everybody, or is it very much dependent on your cultural maybe symbolism, or I don't know, like what this symbol set that you have access to through your language?
Well, I mean, you can kind of see it, I think, a little bit in the way that astrology does and doesn't change as it changes cultures. I mean, we are fairly confident that Venus, who was Aphrodite, who was the Canaanite goddess Astarte, which was the Mesopotamian Ishtar, like you can see how Venus changes from culture to culture, and how Venus stays the same, and how in Mesopotamia Venus was had the sky as a cloak, and that was a symbol of her power. But the Greeks took that in an extremely fatalistic direction and was like, oh, well, if she's wearing the sky, and the sky tells us what our fate is, then she must be one of the fates who's spinning out the fate of the world. And so you can kind of see that idea of, maybe a little bit of like an understanding of there being a connection between Venus and fate in Mesopotamia, but really in Mesopotamia, it's just about raw power. Like everything comes down to order and raw power, and that's the nature of the universe. Like they lived in a very chaotic place that they needed to work very hard to bring into a place where it was even habitable for human beings. And so everything was about fighting chaos, finding order and control, and just having the ability to do shit. Whereas, I compared it to Egypt in my lecture, but the Greeks had so much more of a fatalistic attitude, which made them, Alexander accepting maybe more passive in certain ways. Like there's kind of, no point in really trying to stick your neck out, because if you try to be too much of a hero, the best thing that you can expect for yourself is that the gods will turn you into a star, but you'll still be dead. Yeah. So,
well, okay, all right. So, maybe this is the thing that like really is attractive to me about that approach to Venus, and that it has like sort of these two different expressions. And this is not my original idea, or I'm not the first person to talk about this for sure. Alice Barkley Cat has done a lot of interesting stuff with Venus and its relationship with war. And I have this podcast that I have not made a new episode on in like almost a year now, which is a shame. It's just there's just too much research involved. But I started making an episode of Killer Cosmos, which is just about like just like messed up stuff. The only two episodes, well, there's 3 episodes. One's a 2-parter, but it's about serial killers. But I wanted to like branch out from serial killers. I didn't want to just do serial killers. So it's...
Wait. So Alice Barkley Cat's a serial killer?
You're not following.
No.
Yeah, I know. This is why, I don't know.
I'm so sorry.
Again, Cancer and Gemini, Mercury and the Moon. There's a similar kind of madness, I think. But
Mercury and Aries, I see swords everywhere.
Okay, so I started researching to do an episode on World War II, which was just... Yeah, there's a lot. World War II was a big event. It was a lot of events, actually. And there was a lot of people involved.
Really?
There was no real simple way to start or finish that one.
I thought it was just a duel between Hitler and Indiana Jones,
yeah. No? You would think that sometimes. But what got so interesting about it, and what was like the central theme, that was going to be the central theme, the sort of main arc through the whole thing, was that Venus was so heavily involved in World War II. And like, why wouldn't it be?
What?
Or why would it be? I was asking myself, like, why Venus? Like, what? And then like the more I thought about it, it's like, of course Venus would be involved. Why wouldn't Venus be involved? Venus is about physical stuff. It's about like stuff that is you covet, stuff that you desire, stuff that you want, stuff that you acquire. And it's like you don't really have the impetus to take something from someone else unless you covet what they have, unless it's nice, unless they have something nice, they have something of value to you, and you have the ability to identify that value. But the other maybe layer too is that it's like my little meme post or whatever, was that Mars makes warriors, right? But Venus makes armies, because armies are basically a family of warriors. Like they're a family of fighters. They are people who there's a Saturn side to maintaining an army, which Saturn and Venus have a relationship. But anyway, you get people to fight together by one discipline, but also getting them to love each other, getting them to care about each other, getting them to harmonize with each other, to have a mutual sense of what is valuable and what is good in the world. And, it's like to really fight, maybe you have to love something, to be willing to give yourself over to something, to a cause higher than yourself, to be anything other than just somebody who fights other people. To be a soldier, per se, you have to find something more valuable than yourself. And I think you need Venus for that. You probably need some Jupiter for that too. I mean, there's no planet that really gets left out of the soup. But it sort of makes sense when you're thinking about it in that Mesopotamian sense, that like Venus has like the peace-loving side and the war-making side.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think now about the one of the charts for World War II. It was like, was that a morning star? Actually, it was a Kazemi Venus that was rising when Hitler invaded Poland.
Oh, wow.
Kazemi Venus in Virgo.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's a whole. It's because it's such a big leap. It's like I wish I had a Mercury in Aries, because I totally will get ahead of myself, and it's like, oh wait, I don't know. I feel like Mercury in Taurus is like, like it has to like catch up, and I'm like, I'm not ready for this, for where I got to with this stream of consciousness, or this stream of thought. It's like I have to catch up. My thoughts have to catch up with my mouth.
Well, while your thoughts are catching up, the fact that Venus was so directly involved in World War II makes me see the whole Nazi obsession with like antiquities and treasures so much differently. And then, who was it? Was it Napoleon who said that an army marches on its stomach? Like, of course, that was the first thought that I had as a Taurus.
Well, and think about, okay, so, all right, here we go. All right, excited a little bit. I'm going to try to keep it simple, but okay, we got Hitler, right? Hitler's the Libra rising with Venus and Taurus in the 8th house. Exactly conjunct Mars. Exactly. Like retrograde, I think, applying to Mars. Maybe just separating. Can't remember exactly. Hitler's chart is so interesting. Square Saturn and Leo too. It's so descriptive. But thinking about Venus in Taurus, or just Venus, right? Venus wants things to be beautiful, wants things to be nice. Hitler was an artist. But what he ended up he took it in a really extreme direction, in the sense that he got really obsessed with purity. He wanted to create a country that was very harmonized. He wanted to harmonize the genes of the people that lived in Germany, of the people that lived in Europe. He wanted to purify. Purify is like a super Venus word. To clean it up, make it nice, make it pretty. And it was so like the eugenics movement in general, but like Hitler's take on it, it was so aesthetic in the sense of the way that they defined race was like, if the nose is this size, then they're probably this much Jewish. Like it was just like the pseudoscience.
It was all appearance based.
Yeah.
It was shallow.
It was super shallow, which Venus can maybe be sometimes, right? It's when you take it too far. But it was like Venus, which was very powerful, right? Its own domicile, very strict worldview of what was beautiful and what was not. But conjunct Mars, it was like Mars ended up being his paintbrush, but like the world was his canvas in like the darkest, most twisted way ever.
Painting the world with death.
Exactly. And like the symbolism, when you like think about it like that, and you look at the chart, you're like, whoa. It'll hit you. Like it'll like looking at that chart, you're like, what the fuck? Because Hitler's chart was so specific. But interestingly, born on the same day, Charlie Chaplin, who was interestingly a Scorpio rising. So still had the Venus-Mars conjunction, but it was Mars and Taurus in the 7th. And somehow being the Mars in detriment made Charlie Chaplin, granted Charlie Chaplin had some, he did some nice stuff, for sure. but
everybody does.
Remember Charlie Chaplin much more fondly.
Mm-hmm. And he made fun of Hitler.
He did. But they had the same mustache, which is really funny.
Not that it was an uncommon mustache at the time. It was actually a pretty popular one.
I think that's actually why Hitler had it, was because it was like the mustache of the working class, the working man in Germany.
Interesting. And now it's all his.
What? Charlie? I know now. I know he ruined that mustache for everyone. Not that I'm bemoaning the loss of that mustache, but it was, yeah.
Yeah, no. He killed millions of people and the mustache.
And if you're taking it literally, like Venus being him ruling his ascendant, Venus did that. Venus conjunct Mars with Mars ruling the Mars too, like at its disposal. But it was a very Venusian impulse and instinct that sparked all that death. Yep. Anyway, yeah. How do we dial back from that one? I don't know. Where do we go from there?
Where do you go from killing Hitler?
Oh man, this is why I want to do the episode eventually. It's so much. But his death chart was very interesting. I can't remember it now, but it's very like Hitler's chart. When that's what's weird about astrology sometimes. It's like people's charts, they respond to transits, they respond to like certain techniques and stuff, and like you can find the story in their charts. But Hitler's chart like responds so weirdly to astrology. Like it's so literal in his chart, and then like timing techniques are like precise. Like his zodiacal releasing, like what is this? He like had like a loosing of the bond period, like right when World War I ended, which is when he like woke up in the hospital blind and had this internal crisis because Germany had lost the war. But he even described after that when World War I ended, basically everything that he did from that moment on, he literally described it as like I let fate take over. That was like how he saw everything that he did from that moment on. Like he stopped fighting who he was. It was like literally destiny or whatever astrology or whatever. He just like let himself go. And that's terrifying when you think about it. That's like cosmic horror. Speaking of bringing it back home to HP Lovecraft, that's terrifying. Is that like the universe, astrology, even maybe whatever the astrology is describing, could have possibly like wanted that to happen. I don't know. That's terrifying to me.
Well, I mean, of course, obviously, I have to say the boring thing, which is that just because he says that this is what he did, doesn't mean that it's actually what he did or that he understood what he did. But it is very interesting in light of what Hannah Arendt figured out when she was studying the Eichmann trial, which is really the whole repudiation of responsibility, the refusal to be a person. And like, whenever I hear talk about that, I'm always like, well, yeah, except for Hitler. But I had not heard that about him turning his life over to fate. And it's almost like, if that's true, if he actually was doing what he thought he was doing, then it really is, turtles all the way down. It's, the leader isn't driving and everyone else under him isn't driving either. And it's like he was leading by example, which raises the truly cosmic horror question, which is, if Hitler wasn't driving that frickin' train, who the frick was driving?
No.
Was it
well, that's exactly it. That's like the kind of shit that scares me. Is like who's pulling these strings? I don't know. Because his whole thing was like about letting go of doubt. That was like where the power was. And makes you maybe think about doubt. Maybe doubt is a good thing to have sometimes. Maybe second guessing your instincts and your nature can be is not always the worst thing to do. I don't know. That's why I guess I try to be careful about what I tell people to do with their charts, because I don't know. I think we're almost out of time.